I work with a lot of people who, this is a human condition. There are certain emotions that they don't like to feel. Anger, sadness. There's some people who don't like to feel joy, happiness, and bliss. But that's not healthy because it's one or two things are most likely going to happen. It's going to come out sideways because you can't deny your feelings. I mean, you can try to, you can contract against them, but it's going to come out somehow. It's going to come out of passive aggressive behavior or come out as chronic health conditions. A lot of the challenges we face cognitively have are nervous system problems, not just questions of cognition. So if you can't just change how you think, I mean, that's the first step. You want to change how you think. But if you don't change the nervous system, then you're creating a split in the system where you're starting to think differently, but your body's heading in a different direction. And that split can cause physical ailments, as an example. When you're observing, you're noticing, there's some thoughts, those some feelings, those are some sensations. 95% of most people are like, that's just who I am. And I'm going to act on those thoughts. I'm going to act on those feelings. I'm going to act on those sensations. They haven't created the observation of those things and realize that those things are not me necessarily. They're just fleeting things in my consciousness.
Usually when I start this kind of conversation, I have a pretty good idea of who I'm going to talk to and generally what the field is that the person that I'm going to talk to is in. And with you, I found it kind of hard to pin you down because you kind of seem like a very stress tolerant, very curious generalist who kind of focuses on a lot of different things. But it seems that everything comes together with human optimization, understanding humans, understanding empathy, understanding communication, and trying to really, bring people together, let's say. So I know that also you're doing things with relationships, and I'm sure we'll delve into that later on. But a lot of stuff comes up. So just to throw a couple of labels at you, things that I think you are a social entrepreneur, a psychotherapist, and a human optimization coach. But on the personal side of the equation, and maybe also on the professional side of the equation, if I ask you the question, Michael, who are you? What's your answer?
Man, that's such a great question. I think I popped out of my mom's womb trying to answer this one particular question. Trying to make it's kind of one's a question and one's more aspirational. One is, this makes no sense. And if you look back at my history of various parts, especially when I was a little kid into teenager time, I spent a lot of time going, how we do these things make no sense. And I find people doing things kind of outside the conventional, the mainstream way of doing things. I'm like, that's really interesting. That seems to be a much healthier version of whatever the thing is that I'm looking at. Maybe we need to do more of that. So part of my life is trying to understand, like, this makes no sense. Why do we do this thing, whatever this thing is? And I can give you examples along the way. And also, wow, let's find the experiments in the culture that are, evolutionary, that are kind of the cutting edge. Like, what could be possible if we put our time, effort, and resources in that experiment? Now, in my mind, it's an experiment. And even if it seems like the best thing since sliced cheese, it might be, but 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, it might be the same question. Why are we doing it that way? That makes no sense. So I've had, since I was a little kid, kind of an evolutionary perspective on things.
Mm-hmm.
That's partially answered your question. I think that helps.
Yeah, so maybe to flesh it out a little bit, because what are some of those things? Because if you say that as a kid you were already obsessed with, like, okay, why are we doing these certain things, right? And what will be the opportunity there, or what could we do differently? Can you give me specifics? What are you talking about then?
I definitely can. So yeah, certainly. So I was diagnosed with a learning disability when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, as one example of among a million. I tested out, and I got put into a learning disability program. So 1 hour of the 7 hour day or 8 hour day, whatever it was, I'd be put in this particular class, is the resource class, and it was supposed to help you with your learning disability. That makes sense. I have a learning disability. They're going to help me figure out how to adapt so I can show up better and do school better. Okay, that's awesome. I get sent to the principal's office all the time. I wasn't misbehaving. I wasn't screaming and yelling and causing trouble. I refused to do the work. You're like, why would you refuse to do the work? Because they're giving me the same work that all the other kids, like I was given the same things that all the other kids in my program had that were given. I was like, my learning disability is different than all yours. Why am I doing the same thing as you all? That makes no sense to me. Like, if you think I have a learning disability, focus in on my learning disability and help me learn to learn better or differently. And so I looked at it, I was like, I'm just like like an animal in the zoo. I'm just putting in my cage and like, hey, we're going to pretend to do something for you. And to me, it made no sense. So I refused to do the work. So I spent a lot of time in the principal's office as a result of that. I wasn't arguing, I wasn't fighting, I wasn't misbehaving. I just like, this is a waste of my time. That is one example of among many where I'll be in a situation where I'm like, this makes no sense to me. Please explain it to me. And in many cases, the adults in the room couldn't explain it to me in a useful way that made sense to me. So I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense. What would make sense? And then I can go 25 or so years later, when I spent about 6 to 8 years in education policy, trying to understand how do you create educational systems that reflect the needs of the students, as opposed to the industrial model, which is kind of universal and everyone learns the same thing in the same time, same period. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, everyone's unique to a certain extent. So how do you create systems and institutions that reflect the needs of the individual, while also taking into consideration the collective? Well, I'm not just an individualist. I'm also recognized that we're part of society. So that's just like one small example of me as a kid saying, that makes no sense. I think we could do this differently.
Let me start with this question. The conclusion that you drew, like, hey, this can be different, or hey, there's something special that needs to be done, or something unique that needs to be done. Was that a conclusion that you drew yourself as a child, or did somebody put it in your mind, or did it come forward in another way? How did that come about?
Great question. Another great question. So I appreciate your questions, Jeffrey. So I'll have to go back to when I was 9 years old. And I mentioned learning disabled, but I also had some other issues going on. I was in the hospital when I was 5 with an autoimmune disorder. So by the time I was 9 years old, I had developed an obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a clinical diagnosis.
Okay.
And my mom took me to see a psychiatrist. And this kind of an obnoxious story, but it answers your question. So at the end of the first session with the psychiatrist, and this is 1979. Back then, psychiatrists put you on drugs, and mostly today, psychiatrists put you on drugs. So that would have been my path. Okay. The end of this first session with the psychiatrist, I turned to my mom and I said, he's fat, he smokes, he can't help himself. How's it going to help me? And I left the room. It sounds pretty obnoxious for a 9-year-old, but my mom agreed. Not that she wasn't agreeing with me that I should disparage another person's weight and sizes and stuff like that, but she agreed with me, like, this guy can't help himself because he has such bad behaviors. How's it really going to help me?
Right.
So she found me a therapist, a psychotherapist, Mrs. Pat Lawson. This is 1979, but Mrs. Lawson taught me guided imagery, meditation, biofeedback, and got me in the martial arts. All that stuff introduced me to the idea of personal development, self-regulation, self-mastery, all the various things that I would describe it today. I didn't have those terms back then, but that opened my whole world to exploring other things, other options, other things kind of on the edges of the culture, alternative medicine, alternative philosophy, alternative spirituality. These things are alternative back then. Today they're more mainstream, like meditation's kind of normal thing today. Yoga is a kind of normal thing today. Biofeedback's a kind of normal thing today, but back in 1979 is very woo-woo, very California-ish, like that's just hippie stuff. But those things opened my whole world, and I just started reading. Like the first 3 books I read were Zen Mind, No Mind by Zaita Suzuki, Zen and the Martial Arts, a book on yoga, I subscribed to a magazine called East West Journal. And so I just, this as a little kid, I don't necessarily know that I knew what I was reading and understanding it, but I loved it anyways. And I started exploring all these alternative ways of thinking about the world we live in. Thanks to her opening my world up that way.
Right. Okay. So she helped you draw that conclusion, and then I believe two things happened. So first, she gave you a couple of pathways to explore, like the ones you just laid out, including martial arts,
Yeah,
that I believe you still love today.
I do. Yeah.
But the other one is the drug part, and just what kind of drug was that?
No.
Something like Ritalin, or
So no drugs. So my point
oh, no
was,
drugs.
yeah, if I had stayed with a psychiatrist instead of leaving because I just walked out, he would have put me on drugs because that's what psychiatrists in 1979 would do.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have changed the course of my life because I wasn't put on drugs and I learned to self-regulate through meditation and guided imagery and biofeedback.
Mm.
That opened up a whole different course for my life, with Pat Lawson versus the psychiatrist where I would have been drugged to help me with my OCD.
That is interesting. Why do you think that person put those paths forward? Because I think what you say makes sense and is still true today to some degree, at least from some examples that I know from my personal life. That drugging is a way forward, like a default way almost, right? So why do you think in your case that was those different options were laid out?
Well, it was 1979, and that's just what most psychology and psychiatry would do is you have a clinical disorder, you get on a medication. That's what they do today.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the paradigm we live in. I was lucky because I said no to that. My mom agreed with me. She found me a non-pharmaceutical approach with Pat Lawson, meaning the biofeedback, the meditation, the guided imagery. And I just want to say clearly, I'm not necessarily against drugs for certain clinical conditions. I don't know anyone's particular stories. If they're helpful, that's great. As a general rule, though, for me, and when I teach these things, I suggest let's see if we can find alternatives to drugs before we reach for the drugs. For instance, we talk about children.
Mm-hmm.
ADD everyone has ADD here in this country, all the kids, and they're put on Ritalin or Concerta or some of these other medications. And I have a talk I've given for, 20, some 30, almost 30 years now to parents. And I'll say, I don't know your kid's story, but think about these 9 things before you put your children on any kind of medication. Look at their diet. Look at their consumption of, social media. If it's an issue at school, maybe it's the institution itself that's a problem, not your child. So there's all these other things I encourage families or parents to consider before they allow their doctor to put their child on medication. But I'm not, like I said, I'm not against drugs. I'm just glad I wasn't put on them as a kid.
Yeah. Maybe this is not something I planned for to have this conversation about, but I think this is a very important question to ask. So I'm really curious to find out
Please.
what you think. Because for anybody listening right now that is in the situation that they have a child that is acting out in some way or that behaves in a certain way that makes that child fall into a certain group, whether it may be antisocial or whether it be autistic or whether it be something else, right? And then the path forward is for that parent, of course, who very likely doesn't have any psychological knowledge, is to seek out a professional. And a very common way forward then is to go for the drugs, right? To go for Concerta, to go for Ritalin. So anybody who's in that situation right now, right? What would you, because you already mentioned 9 steps, but can you lay this out? What would you advise that person to do to deal with this?
Yeah, so I don't know how they would name this in your country, but here in the United States, we have things called functional medicine doctors. And they're ones who look at the whole human system. They kind of look at things more holistically, if you want to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend for any condition, whether it's, childhood behavioral challenges or not, to go find someone who's more comprehensive or holistic in orientation. So their first step is not necessarily to prescribe a drug, but they do, they look at the child's diet and nutrition. We know that diet and nutrition plays a key role or can play a key role in behavior. Let's look at what they're eating, what they're consuming. Let's look at their sleep. Perhaps they're not sleeping enough compared to what they need to at that stage of development. That can be addressed. Their screen time, circadian biology. Are they living within the 24-hour day-night cycle?
Mhm.
Or are they up all night like playing video games and disrupting their melatonin production, disrupting their sleep, so not getting deep sleep and deep, the REM times that they need? Look at all those things first. Are they outside playing? Are they physically active? They don't necessarily have to be in sports, but are they outside playing? You're getting some sunshine, some vitamin D, some fresh air. Those kind of things I think are really good questions to ask first. Make sure there's no medical condition, do all the blood work and stuff like that, the tests. Look at the conditions at the home. Is the child expressing the dysfunction between the parents? Parents having a hard time with each other, it can show up in the child's behavior. It's not about the child. He's just expressing the dysfunction in the parents. Those kind of things I think are really important for parents to consider. And I know parents have a lot on their plates. That's why it can be helpful to have, consult with a functional medicine doctor or even a psychologist who thinks more broadly and works kind of more in this comprehensive, holistic approach that I'm talking about, because it's most likely not a deficiency of Concerta or any of the medications. There's something else going on in their human system leading to these behaviors. See if we can address the root causes first. Now, maybe in the short run, you do need a medication to calm the system down to get the focus so they can do the thing. But I would suggest that if you're going to do that, that's a short-term thing. Let's figure out perhaps what other things in the system that we can experiment with, change, modify: the sleep, the diet, the nutrition, the fitness, the movement, circadian biology, all that stuff, screen time, which might actually help improve the brain functioning, the bodily functioning, so the child can engage the world in a healthier way.
Right. And in the situation that the home is indeed causing the issue. So let's take the same example that was discussed with Dr. Alison Greco on episode 37. And in that conversation, what we talked about was the child who doesn't get the proper support the child needs in order to do the things that the child is interested in, right? So let's say you have a kid that is very technologically focused, or very practical. He's interested in things and building things, and the parent then forces the kid, for example, to be very social, to do social things. I don't know, singing lessons or whatever, right? And which is not the interest for the kid. So a parent who is kind of mandating what the future should be, right? It's a typical idea, I think, if you take it to the extreme, of the parent wanting their kid to be growing up a doctor or a lawyer or something along those lines.
Yeah.
It's that idea. So in that case, you can make the argument like, okay, that attitude, I think, is at least a big component in why the kid is, acting out, because they are not able to do the things that they love to do. Then if you are in a position of that parent, then it will probably be very annoying to hear somebody put up a mirror to you and say that, well, you might likely be one of the big causes of this issue. So it's kind of a vague question. But if you take this answer away from the perspective of a parent, and you look at it from a friend's perspective, of a family member, or somebody around that sees this happen with a parent and with a child, it's pretty much the same question. What do you do, right? How do you move forward? If you look at this from the outside and you're seeing that actually this is very likely the parent that's causing this, at least in a bit.
Yeah, so I have an 80-20 rule, and I've looked at the psychological developmental literature, and children develop over time certain cognitive capacities, emotional capacities, and moral capacities. And it's important, if I could train a parent as best as I could for their sake, for them being parents, understanding where their child is at developmentally and what nourishments they need at that particular time to activate the parts of the brain that can flourish at that time. And it's not necessarily the same things that the culture says. If the culture says the child should be reading at age 5 or 6 or whatever it is, maybe for your child, that's not appropriate. maybe developmentally he or she needs to be doing other things. So I would encourage like, hey, put a developmental framework on just as a lens to look at these things. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it 100%, but it's a useful exercise to do. That's one thing to consider. The other thing is like, get to the level of your child and try to understand the world from their eyes. It's easy for us as adults to tell the children they should be thinking this particular way because that's what we think. But that's not necessarily how a 5 or 7 or 10 or 15-year-old is going to think because their brains are developing differently or they're not as mature necessarily as us or have the same inputs that created the conditions for the way we see the world. It's a different, the children today are living in a different world than the world I lived in as a child. So it's like try to get to understand the world from the child's perspective as well as developmentally where they're at. And the 80-20 rule is, I'm a big fan of what's called unschooling, or even democratic free schools or some of these alternative schoolings. I'm not a fan of industrial education the way we do education. The learning, sitting in rows, being told what to do, going from one class to the other, getting ready for factory life, because we don't live in factory worlds anymore, or not all of us do. Most of us do not. We need a different education system. But my 80-20 rule is and the reason I love unschooling is because what is a child, what's their passion? What's their interest? Not every kid wants to be a doctor, lawyer, and an Indian chief. Help cultivate what they're interested in. Now that's the 80%. Because they have an innate genius. I don't know what it is. It might be math. It might be science. It might be playing an instrument. It might be they're just a compassionate human being. They want to help other human beings. Whatever the thing is, but whatever the thing is, find out what it is, help cultivate them 80%. But I do think 20%. I think it's useful exercise to challenge human beings in general, children in particular, to get uncomfortable. If a child just loves art and music, cool. All right. That's awesome. Help them cultivate that 80% of the time. But life can be really challenging. You're not always going to be able to do what you want to do for the rest of your life. You'll have other obligations. And you need to learn how to be, a little bit more mentally tough and emotionally resilient. That's why it can be helpful some of the time to put children under pressure to do things they don't want to do, because as adults are going to be doing things they don't want to do. And you can't just check out oh, I'm not going to do that. And you lose your job unless you're an entrepreneur and you create your own job. So I think it can be helpful 80% of the time, support them where what their bliss is, as Joseph Campbell might say, follow your bliss, but also challenge them to do things that they don't really want to do. They're uncomfortable doing, because that will help them develop some grit and mental toughness and emotional resilience.
Like doing the chores at home or playing outside and not sitting behind the computer all day long.
Amen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. I like it. 80-20 rule. Figure out what your child really likes, support and feel 80% of the time or 80% of the effort, let's say, into supporting that as much as you can. And then the 20% is throwing some curveballs in there just to see, what the kid is made of.
Yeah, because if you don't, life will, and you want your children to be capable of doing with what life throws at them.
I'm still curious what you think. What is your opinion on drugs like Ritalin and Concerta?
All right, so I'm a biohacker. I have been a biohacker since 1988 or 89, somewhere around there. So I like to experiment with things and to see if I can improve certain biological functions. So I just want to speak that I also speak from that perspective too. As a general rule for children, I don't think those drugs are the best option unless it's the last option. Like I said, let's walk through all those other things: sleep, diet, nutrition, fitness, movement, circadian biology, the social structure, the institutions, the family dynamics. All things being equal, they're still having a hard time. Okay, maybe in the short run, a drug like Concerta or Adderall, okay, let's use it conservatively. Not just like, hey, here's your multivitamin and here's your Concerta and you're going to do all this for the rest of your life. I think that can be a problem. Now, that's for children. For adults, kind of the same thing. Experiment. As a biohacker, like, hey, try Concerta, see if it works for you. But realize our systems are dynamically homeostatic, meaning if you put an input in it, it's going to cost you. you got to understand the cost when you try to put an input in that forces your system to do something it doesn't want to do, like focus for 9, 12 hours a day. It's not, if you're
Mm.
incapable of doing that on your own, your brain doesn't want to do that. If you force it to do that, there's going to be a cost to that. You got to understand, as an adult, I'm not talking about children. As an adult, you have to understand the cost to that. And you need to, make adult decisions. Am I okay with the cost? Can I reduce those costs? Are there certain recovery things, like certain nutritional protocols that I can do to reduce the cost to the brain? So I can increase my likelihood of getting better sleep if I'm on a stimulant. All those things are questions I think are important for adults to ask if they're going to play around and experiment with those kind of drugs.
Mm. So what might be, let's start with adults. What might be a very legitimate reason to use Ritalin, for example? Because you mentioned a lack of focus, and you can't force 9 hours of focus. That doesn't even work with 2 liters of coffee, for example. So, unless something is very interesting, then I suppose you can focus for 9 hours straight. But aside from that point, what could be? Is it like, for example, that constantly being tormented with all kinds of different thoughts that you can't focus at all? Might that be a reason to use Ritalin as a adult?
Well, but then I'd be really curious,
Mm-hmm.
because I think you said something really, really important. You know, is there something you can focus in on for long periods of 4 days, six
Oh
hours?
yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, if you're doing something you love, most likely you're like, oh my god, I just 8 hours just flew by, and So if your
Mm-hmm.
system is capable of focusing on things you love, okay, that means you're able to focus. So it's not necessarily like I can't focus on anything. I'm all over the place. If you're all over the place, you can't focus on anything, even things you love. Then
Mm-hmm.
there could be a problem that needs to be looked at. If you're able to focus on things you love, okay, and you're required to do something you don't love, let's just say you have a project due, at work, and it's going to take you literally, 2 days of 10, 12-hour days of knocking the thing out, whatever it is. And you're like, okay, I really need to focus. I got my legal prescription from a doctor, and I'm going to do my Concerta or my Adderall or whatever the most recent thing is that one can take. You take it just just for a short period of time. I'm talking like, 2 days for a project.
Mm-hmm.
Realize that you're stimulating your nervous system unlike it's been stimulated before. This is not coffee, 1 cup of coffee or something like that. There's going to be costs to that. So you got to build in like, okay, how am I going to help recover the system on the third and fourth day? Because what might happen for a lot of people is like, oh my God, I knocked the project out in those 2 days. This is wonderful. Third day, I feel like shit because I just disrupted my brain chemistry and I focused too long. I'll keep taking the drug.
Mm.
And then the next day I'm like, I feel like shit. I'm sorry if I'm not allowed to cuss, but I feel like crap. I'm going to keep taking the drug. Well, my suggestion was like, no, let's not take anything habitually. Always wanted to check in. Do I really need this? And if
Mm.
there's a cost to taking it, ameliorate the cost, reduce the cost of it, through nutritional supplements or whatever you happen to do. Don't just get into like addicted habits of taking something because I feel like crap if I don't take it. That's not a good thing for the human system long term.
Right. Okay. So don't make it like a cheat code for your life, pretty much, but smooth it in, smooth it out tactically, and then after it, when you go back to your regular baseline, do your regular things, your sport, your nutrition, all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
and there are things naturally you can do also to enhance focus, cognition. There are breathing exercises. If people like biofeedback, I mean, you can buy it online. You can go to Amazon, buy all kinds of cool technologies that teaches you how to change brainwave activities, or you can do breath work, for instances. There's certain supplements you can take that might help focus, but got to be mindful of, once again, are the stimulants, are they secondary? Do they cause things that you need to be concerned about? You got to
Mhm.
watch all those things. Exercise increases brain function, improves brain function so you can focus more. So there's a lot of things naturally you can do to enhance your capacity, in this case, because we're talking about focus, to focus. Now, if you have a brain condition, you should go see a doctor. That's something different.
And let's talk about the chemistry for just a little bit. Um, what do Concerta and Ritalin technically do? So I know from a layman's perspective, and you can probably correct me on all the different fronts, but I know that generally it's been described as it calms the mind down. So it's like a counter to hyperactivity. But I also know, and I'm not sure if this is technically correct, but I also know that with children specifically, it inhibits their openness and their creativity. So it's not just that it calms them down to, yeah, I guess a state below their baseline or something like that, assuming that they have been operating on baseline, which I don't know is true. But the second thing is that their impulse for exploring and for learning and for doing creative things and those kind of things, it's being inhibited. So pretty much the thing that makes children, right? That's that constant urge to do exploration, right? To be curious about everything. For as far as I know, that gets inhibited, but I'm not sure if that is true. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
All right. It's great because and I'll answer two ways. One is, I said there's like 9 things to look at before you consider putting your children on drugs, the talk I used to give. The last one is the most interesting to me. I think there's a subset of our species that genetically is wired to seek novelty because they're the ones who allow our species to adapt to changing conditions and allow us to survive over time. The last thing you want to do is medicate that out of existence. To your point, creativity, and and I'm talking like species wide, okay? But even at the individual level, why would you want, if you don't have to, if there are other options, why would you want to limit the capacity of a child to be imaginative and creative and playful? Because as you said, and I 100% agree, and this is what the developmental literature shows, they learn to engage the world by playing in the world, engaging the world, being creative and playful. Like, why would you want to medicate that out of existence? Now, you do want to medicate that out of existence if you want people to be docile in the factory, because you want them doing the same thing every day, every day, every day. So, those drugs are great for factory work mentality or the industrial education mentality, which leads to the factory work mentality. It's all the kind of same thing. But, we live now in the information age. We don't live in the industrial age anymore. I mean, we still have artifacts from it, of course, but for the most part, we're living in the information age where you actually want more people, not less people, to be creative and thoughtful, et cetera, et cetera. So like, yeah, to your point, less drugs are probably a good idea, both for the individual, but for society as well. And then, the last time I took psychopharmacology class was in 92, 92, 93. It's a long time ago. So I don't want to mischaracterize the most recent understandings of what these drugs do to the dopamine system as example or anything like that. I would recommend, if someone's really interested in that, go find some research studies, explain what parts of the brain that these substances, affect in terms of brain chemistry. I don't want to misstate from knowledge that I retained, 30 years ago. I've not kept up the literature today only because I'm not a big fan of the medications. However they affect the brain is how they affect the brain. I think they should be used a lot less. I said that 30 years ago. I still stand on that position today. But now that you brought this whole thing up, I'm like, shit, I need to go and make sure I study the literature much more clearly. So if I'm ever asked this question again, I can answer from a scientific perspective how these drugs actually work on the brain and why they could be problematic. So I appreciate the question because this just challenged me to go, I got to go study something now.
Well, you did say something really interesting there that really stood out instantly the moment you said it. And that is that in this day and age, you need more people to be creative and less people to be ready for, let's say, factory work, to put it like that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And for me, while you were saying that, 2 things were clicking. Because for as far as I know, and I don't know the technical details of it, and I don't know the specific event, so I can't refer to it. So I just know it in abstract ways. But I know that the current school system that you already described, right, sitting in multiple rows with, let's say, between 20 and 30 children for, let's say, 7, 8, 9 hours a day, just focusing on the teacher, focusing on the board and doing your work, right? And not doing anything else, not misbehaving. You just have to focus on that. That system, for as far as I know and for as far as I've been told, stems from a time, I believe in the 19th century, where there was a big need indeed for a lot of workers that just did their job, right? So that they were made to be ready for that specifically. But it also clicks together with the whole thing of Ritalin and Concerta. Because if you take this system, and if you just put between 20 and 30 children, maybe more, maybe less, but whatever, in a classroom, and you want them to focus on the board, right? You want them to focus on the lessons for 7, 8, 9 hours a day. And you have a couple of children that can seem to do that because they're distracted, because they need something else, right? Instead of making the lessons individual or taking the time or effort to see what the child needs or anything like that, right? The easier solution, quote unquote, is to give them those drugs because that puts them back in line, let's say, and makes them, I'm not sure focus is the right word here, but it makes them part of that system again. So the click that happened in my mind where you were saying that is that actually that classroom system and the prescription of Concerta and Ritalin, they are aimed at the same goal, which is to control that kid and to keep him in line and to keep him focused on that school board, right? Without doing anything special or anything that's personalized for that specific kid.
It's a very authoritarian system.
Right.
And there's, as you just suggested, there's medications that keep that system moving forward nicely. Yeah, I would agree with that. And, if your listening audience, viewing audience is interested, John Taylor Gatto, he's an American author. He's written quite a few books. And one of them details the history of this education system. And I believe, if I remember correctly, it came out of Napoleon conquering Prussia of one of the wars, 1859, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. And the Prussians realized that, wow, we can't allow that to happen again. So they created this education system for 3 reasons. One, because they needed factory workers. They needed obedient people in the military. And then they had a separate education system for the elite who are going to run everything. But that education system that was created out of Prussia, I believe, 1811, 1812, or sometime thereafter, what was imported in the United States and the rest of Europe at some point as well. Mm. And that's the system we have. It literally, you sit in rows. It's Pavlovian. You ring the bell, you move to the next class, you sit in rows, you ring the bell, you move to the next class. You're training people to be very docile, which was great for factory work because they're supposed to do the same thing over and over and like it, or not, at least not dislike it. And it's also good for, military service. You want people who are obedient to the rules and to the higher ups in the military. So it's a great system for that kind of thing. As an American, we were supposed to be revolutionary, like we overthrew the British. We're supposed to have that kind of spirit. I think we've lost most of that spirit. We should be saying to ourselves, why would we import a system which is very authoritarian? We don't like authoritarian systems. We obviously do because we imported it and now we expanded it, we shove it all over the world. But if you're an individualist and you believe in the individual, I don't mean in a shallow way, but you believe in the fullness of what's capable of an individual's self-actualize and it's possible. And it's also relational. We can get into relationships too. You would not want a system that makes them docile subjects of someone else. You want them to be active, thoughtful, engaging, interdependent, not dependent, and the whole systems in medicine too, not just education. In medicine, we've created all these systems which are very authoritarian and make us subservient to the authority up there, which is, in my opinion, is very anti-American if you believe in a revolutionary theory. But,
isn't this just one of those things? It's so deeply nested because we have been doing it for at least 200 years already, that it's so deeply nested and so foundational for our entire society, at least the Western society, that it's almost impossible to get away from it. And I do know there are some exceptions here. So I know that, and I'm not sure if they are in Europe as well, but I do know that in the United States there is an alternative system called the KIPP system, KIPP system.
KIPP.
I believe it's point-based. It drives towards responsibility, so it gives kids the responsibility to take care of each other and to tackle challenge together. And if they do it proper, they get points. And with those points, they can get rewards, something along those lines. I don't know the details of it. But anyway, point is, there are some alternatives. But the primary question is, isn't this just one of those foundational things that is very hard to get away from? And should we get away from it?
It's very hard to get away from because it's so embedded. That's just the way it is. We've always done it this way, which is actually not true, but we believe that to be true. There's a alternative out there. It's called democratic free schools, I'm a fan of
Hmm.
all these different alternatives, which, because they work for some people. Let's have more of them. But democratic free schools, I think, are really interesting because it creates a kind of person that I think is necessary in our world today. It's stage dependence. So children actually help determine the rules which guide them in their classroom. They actually come together and they talk it out and they figure out the rules which are going to guide them, and they have
Hmm.
to enforce the rules.
Hmm.
Now, there are teachers, because you have to have adults overseeing things to make sure things don't get out of hand, but there's a lot of freedom for the children to help formulate not only the rules that guide them, how they're going to study, how they're going to do the classroom, all that stuff like that, which I think is fascinating. Because what you're basically doing is you're creating interdependent, because they have to work with each other, so it's relationship based. But you're creating human beings that are self-actualized. They're participating in the creating of systems and structures which guide how they operate in the world. They're not subservient to those systems like, oh, you're the authority, I have to do and do everything you say. Like, I'm actually helping create these systems, which empowers me as an individual, but also empowers us as a group. It's very democratic. That's why it's democratic free schools.
Hmm.
I think that's a really interesting model, and one I love to see, like, expanded upon and used more often. So I think it creates healthier adults than the systems we have today.
Okay, so let's just go back to you because if I remember correctly, at 9 years old, you started realizing together with a person that helped you through it, like, okay, there's a couple of pathways to walk, right? There's a couple of different things that you can do. So before we even start talking about medication, right, diet, exercise, the family situation, all that sort of stuff. Um, then you said 6 years later, you and that's where we stopped in that specific thread of the conversation. But 6 years later, you started actually doing something with that. So you started focusing on it or putting it into practice or something along those lines. Let's pick it up from there. What happened then?
Yeah. So I would say this. Um, I fell out of my mom's womb, as I said at the very beginning, saying, "This makes no sense to me. I want to understand why we do these things. Let me find the alternatives." Fortunately, that whole thing kind of opened up at 9 when I started working with Mrs. Pat Lawson. It was always a
Mhm.
private interest of mine. Like, I studied, alternative spirituality and alternative nutrition, all that stuff in the 80s and early 90s on my own privately. But actually, I was, professionally, I was not going to go into that space. It's just a personal interest of mine. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so most of our neighbors were with the intelligence community or law enforcement, military. So that was where I was going to go.
Mm.
And I actually did an interview, and someone said to me, "You should go get an MBA." This is the 80s. Everyone's getting an MBA. Either become a lawyer or get an MBA. And I'm like, "Okay, I'll do the MBA, because that way you start out at a higher level inside the government." Okay, this makes sense. And I was literally in the middle of the MBA program, and I was doing fine, like 3.5 average. Nothing. It was fine. I wasn't really interested in it, but it seemed like a step I needed to take to get to where I wanted to go. And then, unfortunately, a friend of mine was murdered, and it caused me to have, like, a dark night of the soul. And then a month later, a teacher committed suicide, and that caused it even, like, more. And what I mean by a dark night of the soul, like, reflecting on, like, am I on my path? Is this what I really want to be doing? And I realized, like, my private interest is what was really interesting to me. Like self mastery, self regulation, optimizing the human system, health, wellness, performance, spirituality, that kind of stuff. So I'm like, I'm not interested in the MBA. So I left that program, went out west to California. And that's where I did all my graduate studies, my postgraduate studies, got licensed as a therapist. So, I kind of I shouldn't say back on track, but more of the fulfillment of what I thought, my natural skill set and capacities were, is like more in the therapeutic coaching space, therapeutic back then, now coaching space, as opposed to working for an intelligence agency or a law enforcement agency.
Hmm. Yeah, because it sounds like two things are coming together here, and the first one I think is that you are a person who connects with people, who tries to understand people on a very fundamental level. That started pretty much with looking at yourself and analyzing yourself when you were 9 years old, right? Because you notice that certain things were happening in a certain way, and you ask yourself the question, okay, why is this the way that it works? Why is this expected of me, for example? So it was first inwards focused, but it turned outwards focused because there was a couple of events that made you think, okay, hold on a second. There's a whole lot of stuff happening in that human experience that can do a whole lot of things that are suboptimal, let's say. Maybe something can be done about that, right? So that's the human side of the equation. But also what came, the thing that it came together with was, it sounds like your and correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of sounds like you are a person who is very organized, very, very methodical, you work in a very systematic way, let's say. Um, so those two things came together for you then. And would that be a correct summary?
Yes, really. I love that's an interesting characterization. And I say, yes, that's very true. But there's also a part of me too, and I can walk down this path as well. That's like
Mm-hmm.
the curiosity of why something, like back to the why we do what we do. Why does this work? Um, Led me to explore different areas of human life, which I'll give you some examples of. So it's both method, like I was very disciplined and structured, like I'm going to study this, da, 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 da. But also very like kind of like free flowing. There's parts of that too, like, oh, I'm really curious. Why is that? Why do we do that way? I'm going to go study that. So there was structure to like that curiosity. Once I figured out like I need to go study that, and I go study it. Um, but I think it's a nice integration between force and flow, yeah, if I want to put that way, or structure and chaos of sorts, if that makes sense.
Are you the kind of person that at 11 p.m. in the evening can find themselves stuck on Wikipedia, clicking from page to page to page to page until it's like 5 a.m. in the morning?
So not anymore, because I teach the importance of sleep. So I
Mhm,
have a really good PM ritual that I do, so I don't get caught up in that stuff anymore.
mhm.
Otherwise, I could spend hours studying stuff, getting like hours later. I'm like, oh my god, like you just said, like I could do that. I try to do that during the daytime, not the nighttime, because I try to get my sleep. It's really important.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like it. All right, so very simple question, but what happened then? How did you move forward from that point?
Yeah, so I went to grad school, studied transpersonal psychology, did my postgraduate studies in somatic or body psychology. Got affiliated with Ken Wilber at the Integral Institute, studied spiral dynamics with Dr. Don Beck. Uh, so, just a lot of really interesting things, body, mind, spirit, cultural studies, all that stuff like that. Became a therapist, ended up coaching after a while. And the reason I switched from being a coach, from a therapist to a coach, although I still retain my license, and this goes back to something we were talking about earlier. In 2000, I got a call from an insurance company and they wanted some information about one of my clients, and I'm like, I'm not going to give that to you. Like because I know insurance companies and this can be used against my client. I refuse to give it to you. So at that moment forward, I was like, I'm not going to do insurance, which means if I'm not going to do insurance, I don't need to be a therapist with a license, although I've retained my license. I'm just going to coach because I don't want to have to deal with those institutions
Mhm.
that are going to limit me and how I work with my client or clients. So, so I did that. And then in 2010, for about a decade, I worked for Commander Mark Devine. He's a Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL commander at SEALFIT, helping him develop and run quite a few of his different programs. And that was a really cool time of my life as well.
Mhm. What? Okay, so there's a couple of things on that. There's like every time you're talking, there's like 10 questions coming forward. So I
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
I have to
yeah.
pick and
Sorry.
choose which one.
Yeah, yeah,
This is
yeah,
interesting stuff.
yeah.
Um,
Thanks.
okay, you okay? Definition. You said transpersonal psychology.
Yeah, okay.
What is
What is
that?
that? Okay,
Yeah.
so I had to study in order to get licensed all the conventional schools of psychology, object relations, self psychology, family systems, all the normal stuff you would study in graduate school. Transpersonal psychology, or one way to consider it, is spiritual psychology. One of the frameworks I like to think about when I think about transpersonal psychology is if you look at all the world's religions, whether the monotheistic ones out of the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, the shamanic traditions in South Central America and Africa, they all have spiritual practices. They all have practices which they encourage their members to use to some degree or another to change consciousness, prayer, meditation, breathing practice, sensory deprivation, chanting, all these psychedelics, plant medicine, all these different, and not all of them have all the same ones. You're not going to find Christian, in Christianity, you have prayer, you have meditation. You're not going to find psychedelic medicines. Psychedelic medicines are mostly in South and Central America, for instance, or even in North America, for some of our Native American tribes. Okay. But they all have practices which change consciousness. Some of them open the heart, open the mind, free the body, things like that. In my graduate studies, we studied those things. Meditation, yoga, breath practices, sensory deprivation as tools that we can use with our clients to help them grow, evolve, heal. Today, this is like 30 years ago. Today, meditation is not that big of a deal. Not everyone, I shouldn't say that, but it's a normal thing. A lot of people meditate. A lot of people do yoga, normal thing. But people do Wim Hof as a breathing technique, or yoga nidra as a breathing technique, holotropic breath work created by Dr. Stan Grof. 30 years ago, that was weird, woo-woo California stuff. But today, people kind of on the cutting edge of human potential and high performers are always looking for the cutting edge thing. So meditation, yoga, breathing, Wim Hof, all those things are kind of the normal now amongst that crowd. 30 years ago, it wasn't. We studied those things. That's one way of thinking about transpersonal psychology. Trans just means through and beyond the personal persona. These tools help you move beyond your ego, the mask you wear, to your essential nature. That's one way of thinking about it too.
Maybe this is a very silly question, and maybe you've already explained it. So apologies for that. But when you say changing consciousness, I think it sounds to be very true. That everything that you described, including religion, is aimed at implementing a different framework for a person that a person can operate on, and like a different lens that the world can be viewed through. That sounds to be very true. So when you say you studied that, do you mean you studied the practices that are aimed at changing consciousness? Did you study what changing consciousness means? Or did you study what those practices, what the connection between those two are, if that makes sense? So the mechanism that changes consciousness, or which of those three was your focus on, or was it more like a holistic thing?
So I would say it's more of a holistic thing with the primary focuses on the tools or the practices.
Okay.
So I remember I did a graduate paper on sensory deprivation tanks or float tanks. How they can be used for healing and contemplation and meditation. My master's thesis was on the therapeutic uses of LSD and MDMA, which, this was in the late 90s. Today, there's a lot of great research here in the United States, especially on the therapeutic benefits of MDMA for PTSD. Combat veterans that have shown, tremendous gains by using MDMA legally in clinical settings, reducing the symptomology for PTSD as an example. LSD Hoffman, he's Switzerland, that's been around since for 80 years now, I think it is. Even in the 1950s and 60s, there's a lot of great research on LSD before it's criminalized and shut down. Psilocybin is being researched as an example. John Hopkins is one of the places that's researching psilocybin for various things. So a lot of these medicines have shown to be efficacious through the scientific method that we use here in the West, but a lot of them have been used for hundreds and thousands of years, like ayahuasca, psilocybin, ibogaine, things like that.
One of your big focuses, that might even be the big focus, is that you're teaching the connection between mind and body, and also the spiritual side. So let me take myself as an example.
Yeah, please.
I've never done meditation. I've tried it once, I think. So I downloaded an app from the App Store. That was like a meditation app, right? And you hear some ambient sound, and you hear some dude talking in your ears with a late night FM DJ voice,
That's
right?
awesome.
To make you calm down.
Yeah.
And then he says, stuff like close your eyes, now imagine this and imagine that. And whatever. Didn't work out. Didn't do anything for me. So in my mind, that is meditation. It's a very rudimentary view, probably. So let me just ask you the super simple question. What does mind-body connection mean? And what is meditation?
Two separate things in terms of this. So I'm not a big fan of the mind body using that concept, although it's so prevalent. I use it because it's for conversation's sakes. So my point is I don't like to separate the mind from the body, but we do for the conversation. So
Gotcha.
So when I work with a client, most psychology looks at what happens between the ears, how I think, even some feelings, how I think about my feelings. What I've studied in my postgraduate work in somatic or biopsychology is like we're embodied beings. You can't limit the brain to the head. The heart actually has its own brain. There's a brain in the gut. They all communicate, and this is like this really interesting dynamic system. The muscles are organs that actually produce hormones. Like we're learning so much about the human system that it's not this binary thing. Like it's a complex adaptive system, which is amazing. And we're going to learn more and more and more and more over time about this system. Thank God, because it's amazing. Okay. So when I work with a client, I don't just work with how they think about their thinking. Yes, how you think is important. How you think about your thinking is important. The language you use to talk to yourself, is tone, the volume, the language you use to talk to another human being, all really important because it sets just the stage for how you feel about yourself and how you relate to other human beings and how they relate to you.
Yeah.
But I also work with people like, how do they breathe? Their posture. The breath is a mirror to the mind and how one thinks about and shows up in the world. If one is, for instance, afraid, insecure, operating out of fear, there's probably a breathing pattern connected to that. If one's relaxed, it's a different breathing pattern. If one's operating out of fear or insecurities or whatever it is, there's usually a posture, there's a muscle tone, there's contraction of certain muscles. For instance, some people's jaws get tight, some people's shoulders get tight. Hey, when you're stressed out, what happens? Oh yeah, my shoulders get really tight. Or I get gurglies in my belly, or my stomach feels yucky, or, I have diarrhea or constipation, whatever things happen for people. I'm like, oh, we're not just here. We're the whole body. And I teach people how to actually live inside their body because there's a lot of wisdom there. Pay attention. Pay attention to how you breathe. Pay attention to your posture. Pay attention to the muscles that get contracted when you're under stress. Pay attention to your gut health, all that, your heart, all that stuff is really important. So it's not just about how I think about things, it's actually how I feel them in my body and what parts of my body am I not even paying attention to that I really should pay attention to if I want to optimize my health. And I'll give you an example. So I work with a lot of people who, this is a human condition. There are certain emotions that they don't like to feel. Anger, sadness. There's some people who don't like to feel joy, happiness, and bliss. Whatever the emotions are, like, I can't feel that. They're taught from their family of origins. I'll give you something to cry about. So like, oh, I'm not going to cry ever again. Or only I can be angry. Like, oh, I can't have anger in this household. Or there's nothing to be happy about. Oh, I can't be happy. Whatever the messages aren't just cognitive messages. They show up in the body. Our body learns to react to those messages by organizing itself in a certain way. So like, for instance, if as a child, if I was taught that I can't feel sadness, I'll give you something to cry about. I learned to hold my breath. Everyone's does it differently, but I'll just give you an example. It's like, I hold my breath, I contract against feeling sadness. So I'm not going to feel it. Okay. That's a really good survival strategy when you're 7. So your father, your mother, or the caretaker, whomever it is, doesn't scream and yell at you for feeling something you're not supposed to feel in front of them. I mean, that's their issue, but you learn how to manage it in yourself. But that's not healthy, because it's one or two things are most likely going to happen. It's going to come out sideways because you can't deny your feelings. I mean, you can try to, you can contract against them, but it's going to come out somehow. It's going to come out of passive aggressive behavior or come out as chronic health conditions. IBS, rheumatoid arthritis, neck pain, headaches, various physical ailments seem to have psychological components connected to them. So I teach my clients how to both feel their feelings in totality of their body and let the energy flow, like they're in a Reichian sense, Wilhelm Reich, in the Reichian sense, let the energy of the body flow freely. Now, you're not 3 years old. You don't have to express it and have a tantrum. You're an adult. So not only do I teach my people how to feel more fully by relaxing the system so the energy flows, but also how to healthily express it. How do you healthily express anger, sadness, joy, guilt, bliss, whatever the things are, like learning how to healthily express it. So feel it and express it. That is part, in my mind, of the mind-body connection, because they're connected. I mean, they're one and the same, basically.
So let's put this into practice, if that's okay. So let's say that I step into your office right now, right? Well, the first question is, what might be a good example of something I might be dealing with? Is it indeed those muscles being tight? Is it that posture being? What is generally what is the number one thing that you see people struggling with when they walk through your doors in this specific context?
So yeah, let me give you an example of perhaps a couple that I work with, because that might be really good up there. So for instance, let's say the couple comes to me and I work with them as a couple, and then I work with them individually. So I'm going to share with you the couple dynamic, and then I'll share with you like how I'd work with the husband or the wife who comes into the room after I see them as a couple first. And let's just say that the wife is afraid to share certain feelings with her husband because she feels as if he's going to judge her. So she just shuts down. Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's the dynamic in the marriage. And it could go both ways. It doesn't have to be the wife or the husband and the wife. But let's just say the wife comes in and I'm working with her individually. And I say, all right, you mentioned during our session that you're afraid of expressing certain feelings because you're afraid your husband is going to judge them. So you kind of contract against them. Name one of the feelings. And she's like, well, I'm really sad. Okay. But in my mind, I go, okay, sad's a concept. So I would ask her, how do you know you're sad? Or let's just stick with anger, because anger is an easy one for a lot of people to understand. So she said, I'm really frustrated. I'm really angry. So that's a concept. Cool. In my mind. So how do you know you're angry? I'm just angry. Okay. How do you actually know? How do you experience inside your body, inside your mind, that you're angry? And she'll sit there for a few minutes. Just like, oh, well, when I'm feeling angry, my jaws get tight. I contract my muscles in my arms, a little bit of tightness here in my shoulders. Might contract the fascia and the muscles here in the chest contract a little bit. I mean, most likely she's not going to say this in the first 5 minutes. This takes a little bit of time because most people don't realize how they experience in their body. But I'm like, okay, so when you're feeling angry, all these things occur in your body. Yeah. Okay. But you don't want to feel those things because you're afraid to express it to your husband. So you shut it down. How do you do that? Oh, well, I contract my breathing. I contract the muscles in the fascia. This gets tight because I don't want to say something stupid and get into a fight with them. Okay. What happens in your mind? What are the thoughts? Do you hear a voice? What's the tone? What's the volume? So we try to figure out the full gestalt of how she is attempting not to feel this particular emotion, anger. Okay. Once we know how she does that, and it's for all the emotions, we'll stick with anger. Then we try to deconstruct the system which locks the non-feeling of the anger in. So like I'd say, all right, so one of the things I heard you say is like you get tight here, like you kind of drop this down and just tightens here. And I have her go into her mind and remember a moment where she felt angry. I said, go back into your mind and feel anger. And she has to feel safe to do this with me. So this might not be the first session. Like, it might take a little bit of time. But she gets in her mind. She's like, oh my God, there's this incident with my husband like 2 weeks ago. And I was so effing pissed at him, blah, blah, blah. So, all right, you were really effing pissed at him, but you didn't express that anger. And I'm not suggesting you get road raging and throw things at your husband, but like you held it in. And she walks me through how she holds it in. All right, so let's do this. Remember the anger, and I want you to relax the chest, relax the muscle, relax the fascia, and start breathing more fully. Because most likely when you're contracting against anger, you're holding your breath. So let's breathe more fully. And if you're noticing that there's a little tightness here and a little tightness here, I might have her just touch some points. Start relaxing the muscles there. So the jaw relaxes, the throat opens up, the energy starts flowing, and she starts feeling the anger. Now, she's not 3. I don't need her to throwing things, and breaking things and stuff like that, but I need her to really start feeling the feelings: anger, sadness, bliss, joy, happiness, whatever it is. Remove the armor against feeling it so she can feel it. And then once she starts feeling it, oh my God, there's a lot of good energy there to utilize towards action if she wants to. Information will come up for her because she's, like, how is this connected to other incidents in the marriage? How is this connected to your childhood? Like, all these things are usually connected. And she starts seeing the connection historically over time inside the marriage, and she starts feeling more fully. Now, that's step 1. Like, I want her to feel. But the step 2 is like, oh, how do you regulate that then? Because I don't want her walking around like pissed and, all for the rest of her life. That's not really helpful to her health-wise, or to her husband if she wants to retain the marriage. Like, so how do you manage that? Now that you know the feelings are inside of you, how can we use that energy to take action? Maybe you need better boundaries. Maybe you need more clarity in your communication. What, I don't know, like I just make stuff up, but like, I don't know what's called, whatever the situation is that causes you to feel the anger. How do we resolve that situation? Maybe, like I said, maybe you need better boundaries and you need to clarify them with your husband. Maybe you need to communicate more clearly what you want and need to him. Maybe you need to listen to him more. Maybe part of it is that you're actually not engaging with him in effective communication. It's not just him not listening to you. Maybe you're not listening to him. Maybe a lot of the stuff can be resolved if you guys communicating more openly and honestly and stuff. So it's like, so let's resolve the cause of the feelings, but first let's feel the feelings. And then let's learn to communicate better or set better boundaries or whatever the thing is that we want to do. So that'd be part 2. So if you came in, that's what I'd, part of what I might do with you, depending on what you brought to the table.
Let me poke at this for a little bit. I asked a couple of different people on both sides of this question to define what the difference is between a psychologist and between a psychoanalyst. And the answer that I've consistently gotten, so that if you take their answers, because of course they'll kind of defend their own field, let's say, but the average of their answers is that a psychoanalyst goes on a journey with their client towards the root cause of whatever it is they're dealing with today. And the deeper buried that problem is, the more time is needed to go there, right? Because there's a whole bunch of stuff stacked on top of that. The psychologist doesn't generally do that. The psychologist focuses more on the consequences of that root cause, of what is happening today. So if something happens in someone's childhood that causes them to act in a certain way today, the psychoanalyst will go to the childhood and the psychologist will go to today and fix that. That's generally what the difference is. But the reason why I'm bringing this forward is that both do one thing. Both do a very similar thing, which is go on an exploration into the mind with their client to figure out how to move forward. Now, you added an extra layer to that. You said, hold on a second, before we even go there, right, we need to connect you again to what you feel. So step 1 is feel your body again, right? That's step 1. Why not skip? So this is a very contrarian question and maybe a very silly question, but why not skip that step? Why do you think this is important?
Because there's a lot of wisdom in the body, and we miss out if we don't connect to it, is one answer. I have a few, but that's one. There's a lot of wisdom there.
Mm-hmm.
We can pay attention to it. We'd be healthier, happier, more productive in our lives if we listen to the wisdom of the body. That's one thing. The second thing is a lot of the challenges we face cognitively have are nervous system problems, not just questions of cognition. So if you can't just change how you think, I mean, that's the first step. You want to change how you think. But if you don't change the nervous system, then you're creating a split in the system where you're starting to think differently, but your body's heading in a different direction. And that split can cause physical ailments, as an example. Because like your body's heading in one direction and your mind's heading in another direction. In my work, I want alignment. So yes, I want to work with people how they think about stuff. That's really, really important. I'm not denying the importance of the mind, in this case, the rational mind, and how we process information. But you want to have it aligned as best as you can with the nervous system, the totality of the human body, so that the whole system is moving in a new direction, not just part of the system, the mind. So, like for instance, if someone came to me and they thought poorly of themselves, I just have low self-esteem as an example. I'm like, oh, just change your thinking. Think you have high self-esteem. They can do all the affirmations they want. They can do all the self-talk they want. And all those things are useful. Like, you want to catch yourself, beating yourself up. You can change the dialogue in your head. I think that's really important. And I encourage that. You catch yourself saying negative things about yourself. Okay, stop, pause, change the dialogue into something positive. But most likely, the foundational thing that causes the poor self-esteem is something that's stuck, is not just in the mind, it's stuck in the body. It's a nervous system thing. They learn to react to the environment in a certain way, a real perceived threat. It gets locked in the system, not just in the mind, although the mind body is the same thing. So you can't just change one piece of it. You got to change the whole thing. You got to change how the nervous system responds to the real perceived threat, which denigrates our in this case, someone's confidence in being in the world because they tried something and someone screamed and yelled at them and like, oh my God, I'm not going to do that again. I'm afraid to actually operate in the world. That's just not a thinking thing. That's in the breath. It's in the nervous system. So that's why I think it's really important to also work with the breath and the nervous system and teach people how to regulate themselves differently, not just how they think.
So if we make this practical, so let's say that the person who is listening right now is dealing with a certain challenge, whether that is depression or whether that is anxiety or whether that is anger, frustration, or any other thing that might be disruptive in one's life. What are some practices that people can apply? Maybe when it comes to their breathing, maybe when it comes to their focus on their body, maybe when it comes to their exercise, that people can do that are maybe simple to begin with, but that in your opinion are very effective in order to combat those negative feelings, negative emotions, destructive emotions even maybe.
Yeah. So let's just assume for the moment it's not a clinical depression, because that would be a different kind of conversation, but it's just, or let's just say it's a generalized anxiety or specific to life conditions, but not a strong medical condition. Because that's a different conversation. I would encourage, you make sure you go see a doctor and get blood work and make sure everything's functioning properly, your hormones are okay and all that stuff. But let's just assume that your blood worker shows you're a healthy human being, but you're still dealing with some anxiety. So it's okay. A few things that I recommend people do, and this is for everyone, no matter what if you have a condition or not. Sleep. That's if I could recommend a few things for everyone, dial in your sleep. If you can, try to go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. Have a evening ritual that helps this human system calm down so you get more sympathetically activated. There's some breathing techniques you can do or binaural beats you can listen to on headsets, a guided meditation to calm the system down. Don't be on your phone or your iPad or your laptop. Don't eat 3 hours before bedtime. Certain things you can do to increase the sleep hygiene, so you increase the likelihood of getting better sleep. Don't eat 3 hours before. Don't be on your devices a few hours before. Have a sleep ritual. I'm not a nutritionist, but hey, there's some nutritional protocols one can take, like not melatonin, although that's useful for sleep, for jet lag. Um, um, Shit's right over here. Hold on, because I take it. It's magnesium as an example. There's other things one can take, but like whatever it is for you, get a nice sleep hygiene, sleep program. Do that every night. Go to bed at the same time. Get up early. Get up at the same time every day, if possible. You want your room as cold as possible. If that's the condition that works for you, that research shows the colder the better. Seems to work, but test. Like this is N of one. Just test these things out. Blackout blinds. So you don't have artificial light coming in from street lamps, or you put a night, face mask on. So there's various things you can do. That's the first thing. You start dialing your sleep. I'd be really curious if some, if not all, or some portion of whatever condition you're working with improves. Then I look at diet and nutrition. What are you eating? Are you eating food that's meant for human beings? Or you're eating ultra processed fast foods, which can contribute to possibly depression, anxiety, and a whole host of other psychological issues. Your drug use. When I say drugs, caffeine, alcohol, are they problematic? Are you drinking too much caffeine? Too much caffeine can cause anxiety, cause sleeplessness. I mean, the next day you need more caffeine, So diet, nutrition, sleep are two things. And the third thing is fitness. Doesn't mean you have to be an Olympic athlete, but are you moving every day? It doesn't mean you have to even go to the gym. Go for a walk. I'm 10,000 steps there's no scientific validity behind it, but at least have a goal. Move your body, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, Pilates, play soccer, basketball, ride the bike, whatever your thing is. Get the energy of the body moving, get the physicality of the body, because the muscles actually produce hormones, beneficial hormones that you want to actually move. So like if you're asking for practical things, those aren't even psychological. I haven't gotten to psychological stuff. Dial your sleep, eat healthily based on your genetics. There's epigenetic tests to determine. In my opinion, there's no one diet that fits everyone. It's unique to you as an individual, because genetically people process, fats differently. They process caffeine differently. They process carbs differently. So, find out what works for you. You get blood tested over time just to make sure it's working for you. Like dial in the dial that's best for you at this particular time of your life, and then movement. You don't have to be an athlete, although it can't hurt to go to the gym and, lift weights, because that's really helpful for you too. But like, just move the body, move the body, move the body. You dial those three things in, then come back to me to let me know how your depression or anxiety is. I would guess, and there's no universals, that there'll be improvements.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that most of the things that you're saying right now are getting a lot more attention nowadays. So the value of good sleep, and at least I believe the number is 7 hours, but ideally 8 hours, is a good amount of sleep for people to get. And a couple of things, and let's not delve way deeper into that, but a couple of things that you mentioned make perfect sense, and I think are getting way more attention right now. Things like don't drink a lot of water before going to bed, don't eat a lot before going to bed, no phones, all those sorts of things. You mentioned two specific things that I think are very interesting to do before sleep. And I've never done them. So this is also a question I'm honestly genuinely interested to know how to get started with that. Those two things are breathing exercises and guided meditation, or maybe meditation in general. Let's start with breathing exercises. What can I do to improve my sleep, specifically when it comes to breathing exercises?
The breath is a great tool for many things. You can increase your energy, you can decrease your energy, you can expand your consciousness, and you can learn to focus more clearly. The breath is great for those things. If you want to relax the system, which certain breathing practices one can do, many different types, but just for conversation's sake, do a 5 count inhale. abdominal breath. You're not just breathing through your chest, but like you feel the extension of your abdomen away from your spine. When you're inhaling, you feel a contraction toward your spine and you're exhaling. So it's important that you're actually doing abdominal breathing, not just like chest breathing. And you can do a 5 count inhale. So you 1, 2, as you're inhaling, 3, 4, 5, and then exhale 7 count. And then inhale 5, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, exhale 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the exhale is a little bit longer than the inhale. Practice that. There are so many other really interesting techniques out there, but I would say do that for 2 minutes and see if that helps calm the nervous system down. With guided meditation, which you said you're not really a big fan of, you can go on Spotify. I don't know if Spotify is available in your country, but
Yes, it is.
okay. I didn't know if it was
I think it's
international.
available everywhere nowadays.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Where apps are found, so that's cool. Yeah, like on Spotify, you can literally, in the search function, say guided meditation for sleep, and you put your earphones in and play it, and 20-minute meditation. And I'm sure I can't speak for any one meditation practice in the guided in the app, but like it'll walk you through calming your nervous system down in preparation for sleep. If you want to do a guided meditation, and there are tons of apps out there literally for meditation purposes. And you had actually asked me about meditation. We're not going to be going down that path, but a guided meditation is not real meditation. If you look at meditation in its purest sense, it's you're creating the witness to the human experience. You're witnessing your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, and you're just witnessing all these things. Now, that's more in the spiritual sense because you're getting into like your soul, like the witness of all these of the human experience. We can put that aside. Doesn't mean you can't do a guided meditation called meditation. That's fine, but that's not the real intent originally of meditation. Is to relax the system. The intent of meditation is to be a witness to the human condition, really, what's our true nature behind all this, the mind chatter, the monkey mind, and all the feelings and sensations. That's a conversation you kind of have another time. But guided meditation, if that works for you, it doesn't work for you. But if that works for your listening audience, try it. And if that doesn't work, and you like music, you can play some music, not head banging music or rap, but like whatever you would find be relaxing. Play it half an hour before you want to go to bed in the background. If you find it relaxing, just find out what works for you. Experiment, keep experimenting. Find out what works for you to relax your system so you're more calm as you head off to bed.
Would you say that, and this is again from somebody who doesn't do meditation, so perhaps a very silly question, but would you say that reading before going to bed and not of a smartphone, so, not Instagram, that doesn't count in this case, but reading an actual book, is also some form of meditation in this case, in the sense of you are getting absorbed in the story that you're reading, you're imagining it, you are experiencing it, if you're really into the book that you're reading or really into the stuff that you're reading. Does that also count as a form of meditation, or would you completely separate these two?
As long as it doesn't stimulate you, like, oh my God, I'm reading this, I'm excited, and I'm not going to sleep, I'm going to stay up all night reading the book, that's a different conversation.
Right.
But like, because of the way we've organized our technology these days and our focus is like, I think we can focus for like 15 seconds and then we're off to the next thing. If someone can actually sit and read a book and keep reading a book, I think that's wonderful because you're developing the part of your mind that allows you to focus and contemplate and think while you're focusing. And because of society and our culture is opposed to that, the way we structured it, that's a great practice. So like, yes, as long as it doesn't stimulate you, because the intent with what I'm talking about is better sleep. Great. Yeah. If you like to read and it's good and you enjoy what you're reading and it doesn't get you all excited, that's a great practice for calming the system down and focusing the mind.
And let's get the timeline to the morning. So you wake up and there is let's say a very important meeting coming up that morning, right? I don't know, job interview or big meeting with your manager, whatever it may be. What might be some things there that you can do to calm your mind and to make sure that you're calm and collected. And considering the fact that so assuming here that you had a good night's sleep, what can you do to prepare for bed within this context?
So it's a great question, because all my clients, I have them do AM rituals and PM rituals. AM rituals to get their human system ready for the day. PM rituals to get the human system ready for sleep and dream time.
Mm-hmm.
So in the morning, and this would be just consistent. I'm gonna share mine. These are mine. Figure out what works for you. Try them out and see if they work for you. But I always encourage my clients to experiment, because what works for me might not work for you. But every morning, what I do, and I encourage clients to think some version of this, is ask yourself these questions. How do I rehydrate? Drink a glass of water. If you like electrolytes, put some electrolytes in there, or a little bit of salt, and lemon water. You rehydrate your system. I find that's a nice thing, because you rehydrate your system and it makes you have quicker bowel movements. So you get it taken care of, which is awesome. Second thing is like, okay, how do I get the energy of the body moving? Now, I'm not going to suggest get up and do a CrossFit workout, but if there's some movement practices that you can do just to get the energy of the body moving. I like to dance, not in front of other people, but dancing is one thing I like to do, and I like the music, and it gets the energy flowing in the body, and I just feel better. I also have some Taoist mobility type drills that I do. I just kind of get the energy of the body flowing and makes me feel better. It's like, what can you do to get the energy of the body loose and loose and moving, and so you just feel better in the body? What works for you? Heart. What can you do to open your heart so you can be grateful? So gratitude practice. One of the first things you could do in the morning is, what am I grateful for? Name 3 things. Even if you're having the most shitty day, week, month, year, there's got to be at least 1 or 2 or 3 things you can be grateful for. That's important. Makes you feel good. Opens the heart. All right. The mind, the movement stuff, the gratitude stuff is really good. But if you're preparing for like a job interview, there's certain breathing practices, like a box breathing. Box breathing, you think of a box, a square. So you might do a 4-count inhale, a 4-count hold, a 4-count exhale, 4-count hold, and you just repeat this for 2 minutes. There's apps that actually time it. So you can do 4 seconds or 5 or 6. But that's a great focusing tool for like meditation to calm the mind. So if you're like, I'm a little nervous, I've done all this other stuff, I'm a little nervous getting ready for this job interview, do that. That will calm the system down. Because you're kicking in the parasympathetic nervous system, more nutrition and oxygen to the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's the thinking part of your brain. So you're less stressed, you're less reactive. So that's one thing you can do. If I was working with someone who's doing a job interview, I'd obviously want to make sure they're prepped for it. Like, have they doing all the prep work, so they're not just showing up blindly? That's not helpful. So like, make sure you do all the work. You can't, you can show up calmly, which is important. You can do the breath work and feeling good in the body, but if you're not prepared for it, then you're going to fuck that up and not probably get the job. So you do all the prep work, whatever the thing is. But yeah, just the 4-count breath hold or the 5-count breath hold for the box breathing. A little bit of movement practices, hydrate. I'm a fan of Huberman, his podcast. He recommends don't drink. If you're going to drink caffeine, don't drink caffeine for the first 90 minutes, because it disrupts your own releasing of your own corticosteroids in terms of adrenaline and there's another one that the adrenals produce. But yeah, so like, hey, if you're nervous, probably the last thing you want to do is drink coffee, get even more nervous. Is there something you can drink that might calm you down? Are you a tea drinker? Cool. Maybe that morning you drink something that's a little bit more calming for you. So yeah, all those things I would play around with and see what works for you. Just because it works for me doesn't mean it works for you, but generally speaking, do something that limbers the body and gets the energy flowing, something that opens your heart, something that relaxes the mind. Take on the day.
And let's make this specific and also trackable. So one of the things I think that is very hard to do is to see that a certain thing that you do, whether it is meditation, whether it is reading, whether it is whatever, to measure exactly what the positive effect of that is on whatever it is that you find important. So that can be, in this situation, two things. It can be the positive impact on your sleep, or it can be the positive impact on you getting ready for the day, right? And then the question is, how can you track effectively what, both how effective it is, what you're doing, but also how effective continued practice is over time? Because if you want to do 100 push-ups, right? And if I ask you right now, do 100 push-ups in as fast as you can, right? And right now you can do it in 20 minutes, and you do it every day. Well, in a week you can do it in 10 minutes, and another week you can do it in 5. So you can make it very time bound. You can make it very specific. But with this, it becomes a lot harder, because this is not a thing that you physically do. It is more, I'm not sure if it's completely a mental thing, because, as you said, how do you track it?
So that's a great question, and I literally just taught this yesterday. So this is like, are you psychic? Like, were you on my call yesterday? This is great. And I do want to step back and say I'm a strong supporter of experimenting, but you also have to try whatever it is you can't just try it once, like, oh, it didn't work for me, I'm quitting.
Right.
Like, try for 30 days as an example, just so you have consistency and see, does this, give yourself 30 days, whatever the thing is, a practice, and then you can see if it works for you. If you try it once, it doesn't work, it's meaningless. You don't know that it doesn't work. Okay. With that said, there's a framework I use: first person, second person, and third person, to look at behavior change, what's working for me. First person is how I feel inside, my subjective self sense. Oh, I do this practice and I feel what? I feel happier, healthier, more energized, more loving, caring, compassionate, whatever the thing, whatever you could imagine the results would be from the exercise you're trying to do. I feel them more. Okay, great. But we can delude ourselves, right? We can think, oh, I'm doing this thing and I'm feeling so much better, but it's actually not working. We're deluding ourselves. So that's where second and third person comes in. Second person would be someone in your life who's important to you. Get feedback from them. So, if I'm doing a practice that I want to be more loving, and I'm doing whatever maybe there's a heart-based meditation that makes me more loving, allegedly. And I'm doing the meditation and I say to you, Jeffrey, I'm doing this meditation, I just feel somewhat more loving. Great. I'm glad you feel more loving. That's awesome. Let's talk to your wife or your husband, your partner. How is he or she showing up? Oh, it's still the same jackass they were before they start, okay. Okay. So maybe you're deluding yourself. Maybe your partner's having a bad day, so they're not the best judge of assessing you at that very moment. So keep that in mind too. But get feedback from a second party. And third person is also one of my favorites, is like objective empirical measurements. The loving thing, HeartMath, is a great company that has a great tool that can measure heart coherence, the coherence between the brain and the mind, brain and the head, and the heart. And it measures it through biofeedback. So you can get objective measurements to show that you're more loving, caring, compassionate. So I feel better, I get feedback from my partner, and then I can actually measure it objectively. And I have my clients do that. So when I start working with a new client, although I'm not a medical doctor, I'll say, let's go get blood work. Go talk to a functional medicine doctor. Let's get baselines of everything. Let's get a DEXA scan and see how your muscle fat ratios are. And then we do my program and we hopefully show improvement over time. Because you've got to be able to measure improvements. You can't just say, I feel better. Great, I'm glad you feel better, but is it objectively measurable? Is your emotional intelligence improving? Is your complexity of thought improving? Are there physiological markers in the human system that are improving? Is there changes in the brainwave activities? Like, let's figure out what we can measure as much as we can as baselines, do these practices, and hopefully over time show improvement. So first person, how I feel, how I think. Second person, feedback from a second party. Third person, objective empirical measurements. Yeah.
In your opinion, have we already talked about mindfulness?
No.
What is the difference between what we just discussed and mindfulness?
So when I shared with you earlier, kind of my understanding of what meditation means is to be a witness to one's thoughts, feelings, and sensations. That's mindfulness. You're witnessing. Oh, there's some thoughts. My monkey mind's active. It's doing its thing. There's some feelings in my body. I'm not attached to them, but I'm just noticing them. There's some sensations like my big toe hurts, or I have gas, or like my shoulder's a little bit tight. You're noticing these things. I can be
Mm-hmm.
mindful of other people. I'm just noticing you. Like, oh, you see, like I'm watching you right now, and I can make comments about what I observe about you. Yeah. So, like, mindfulness is the ability to be a witness to your own human processes and perhaps to your environment and things going on in your environment. It's a skill that it's useful to cultivate, so you can be aware of these things. And because once you're aware of them, then you can make changes. Like I always in my work, awareness is the first thing we need to do. We need to be aware of how we do what we do before we can change it to something else. If that's our goal, is to change into behavior or a way of feeling, being, showing up in the world, whatever it is. So mindfulness is a great practice. Yeah.
What is the difference between being mindful and just being conscious about whatever it is that is happening on within you and around you?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends how you define conscious, but I could say it's one and the same. You're aware of what's happening inside your human system. You're conscious of it. You're aware of it. You're mindful
Mm-hmm.
to it. You know, assuming that they're very similar in how you define those terms, I would say they're all the same or very similar.
Right. So the person that walks out on the street and cuts off another person just without thinking about it, just because, whatever, they want to go first for that reason. They are conscious in the technical sense,
Oh,
but they
okay.
are not
Yeah.
mindful.
Okay. So you mean okay. So that's a different definition of conscious. But yeah, actually what you just find is perfect. Yes, they're conscious because they're operating in the world, but they're not mindful. Maybe they are mindful. Okay, I want to be a jackass right now and not give a shit about other people. Okay, you're mindful about that.
Mm.
Now, most people, don't necessarily do that. Most people will be like, wait, I'm about to act in a certain way, which goes against maybe my beliefs or my ethos, and I'm not going to do that. But so you can be mindful and still act poorly, but most people act poorly or don't do it mindfully. They just do it out of habit.
Mm. So let's approach it from the other direction then. Is it possible to operate without being mindful?
Yeah, most people do it all the time.
Okay, because that to me sounds very weird. So maybe I got the definition wrong. So feel free to jump in. But it sounds like if you think about the experience, whether it's your own experience or around you or whatever, you make calls about that, and well, maybe a better way to describe it is being mindful is like working in a manual way, right? Make doing things or making choices dependent on what you see happening around you. So you're very hands on, and maybe then not being mindful means you're automatic pilot. You're a self-driving car. You're not thinking about it. You're just doing it. Is that the way to think about it?
No, because one way, well, okay. From my understanding, one of the purposes of mindfulness training
Mm-hmm.
is to create the observer, and the observer is independent of whether you're doing it automatically or thoughtfully. Because you can watch yourself do your automatic behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
This is and you can also watch yourself being more thoughtful of how you're behaving. So the mindfulness is just the observer of those things. It's not making a judgment on, oh, I want to change those things. Now you can use that observation space to make assessments on your behavior. Oh, I don't like this automatic, habitualized way of being in the world. I'm going to work on that. Or or I want to be even more thoughtful of how I respond. Even when I'm being thoughtful, I'm not being as thoughtful as I could be. But the first step is just you developing this awareness or this witness to how you do the thing, independent whether it's automatic, habitualized response, or very thoughtful. You're just noticing either one of those two things.
Okay, can you explain to me how a person looks that is not mindful at all? What does it look like?
Probably 95% of all human beings that you encounter on a daily basis. Like, because for me, mindfulness would be I observe, I'm a witness to my monkey mind doing all this monkeying around, very active
Yeah.
mind. I'm a witness to my emotions. I'm a witness to the sensations in my body. Most people operate as if those things are real in them and they have to act from those things. I have to act from the thoughts. I have to act from my feelings as opposed to I'm observing those things. So they are not free, in a lot of my work, freedom is a really important thing. Freedom to choose how you want to engage the world, how you want to engage yourself, how you want to engage the world. You go from reaction to responsiveness. When you're observing, you're noticing there's some thoughts, those some feelings, those are some sensations. 95% of most people are like, that's just who I am. And I'm going to act on those thoughts. I'm
Mm.
going to act on those
Mm.
feelings. I'm going to act on those
Mm.
sensations. They don't haven't created the observation of those things. And you realize that those things are not me necessarily. They're just fleeting things in my consciousness. Now, when you create the observer and you notice my thoughts, feelings, and sensation, you can still act on them. You're still, you can still say, oh, well, that's a great thought I had, and I'm going to act on it. That feeling is real. I'm going to act on it. That's cool. Like, but there's a choice there. You're not just automatically doing it because you identify. This is like transpersonal psychology. Personality, our mask we wear, we make the assumptions that our thoughts and feelings are real. We need to defend them to the death. And you see this in relationships all the time. I'm going to fight for my identity. This is who I am. But you're actually not those things. There's aspects of self, those aspects of ego, which is fine. But in ultimate reality, those are just the fleeting things. Your thoughts come and go, your feelings come and go. Not that they're not important. I want to say they are important. But when we too closely identify with them, we're not free. When you create the observer and you start noticing, oh, there's some thoughts and there's some feelings, and wow, I really organize my identity around those thoughts and feelings. Do I really want to do that? I mean, there's some choices you can make. You can, some more explorations to do, some deep therapy or coaching work, whatever it happens to be, some more introspection. So just because you have the observation skills, which are really important, doesn't mean you necessarily change your behavior, but it can give you some really good perspective on those behaviors and like, oh, I do want to change those because those aren't serving me or my ethical system, how I relate to my family, friends, coworkers, and whatever it is. How I relate to myself, how I think about myself. But you don't notice those things until you create the observer to see those things. Like my self-talk sucks. Like I beat myself up all the time. Man, the way I talk to my children, like I'm starting to notice, like I really have a negative, approach to my children, how I talk to them. The way I talk to my wife or my husband, like, oh my God, no wonder they feel poorly about themselves. I just keep beating them up. But you don't notice those things as you start noticing those things. You create the witness to, wow, how do I talk to myself? How do I talk to these other human beings who are seemingly important to me? Once you witness that, you observe it, you're aware of it, then you can take different decisions through therapy or coaching.
Something clicked while you were talking. Because you said that the absence of mindfulness, one of the things that can manifest in is the acting out on thoughts without thinking twice about it. And I think that is correct. That makes sense. Because I think this is also an answer to the question, what does critical thinking means? Right? Because when you ask people the question, what is thinking? The answer often is the thoughts that come into your mind and speaking them out. That is thinking. But that is not what thinking is, right? That's just throwing something into the world that you conjured up in that second. Actual critical thinking is taking that thought and trying to break it apart, right? Trying to look at it from multiple perspectives, trying to conjure up more things and then letting them do combat in your mind, let's say, to see what sticks and what stays alive. And that thing that stays alive is probably the good idea that you can try out in the wild, you know, in the real world, to see if it works out or not. And if it doesn't work out, it was a crappy idea. If it does work out, it was a good idea, right? That's what critical thinking is. The reason why I lay this out is because I asked you the question, what is it like for people to be not mindful? How does it feel? And how do I know that someone is not mindful? And your answer was kind of tongue in cheek, but that is 95% of humanity. That brings me forward just one question that I can ask. And this sounds like an abstract question, but it is actually a very, very personal question. And I'm really curious about what you think the answer is. Does humanity become inherently more frustrating the more mindful you are?
Man, that's a great question. So I've been playing around this space professionally for 30 years, as a human being, you know, for 40 some years. And I'll say, when one begins to develop the capacities to observe and notice these things, at least my experience suggests, at first it becomes more frustrating towards yourself and towards other people, because it goes back to my first question. I told you, this makes no sense. Why do we do that? Like, that is so silly. We have so many other options, and yet we choose the one that's self-destructive or destructive to our relationship, destructive to the environment, whatever the thing is. And you're like, that's so, like, you get, your level of frustration, at least my experience with people and myself, increases. But then you get, at least for me, get to a point of relaxation. You realize that this is just part of the human condition, and you look at us as a species, not necessarily as individuals or groups of individuals, and you look at it over the time memorial, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And you at least for me, I relax a little bit. I'm like, oh, we're just humans humaning. And sometimes we fuck things up, and sometimes we do pretty cool things, and we're learning as we go. Sometimes it's a couple steps backwards. Sometimes it's seeing a couple steps forward. Sometimes it's both at the same time. So the frustration level, at least for me, has diminished greatly. At first, it was really high. Probably contributed to my obsessive compulsive disorder and all of the challenges I faced as a kid. So I'm like, this makes no fucking sense. Why people do these things? But like I said, hopefully I matured and got older and got more thoughtful and more open, and added these kind of other perspectives in: historical perspectives, species perspectives. We're humaning. We're trying these things. It's like we're doing the best we can. So yeah, I still ask the question, why do we do what we do? Here's some alternatives to this. But, you know, maybe it's because of my meditation, you know, in the Buddhist sense of being less attached. Maybe I'm less attached to the outcomes. Okay, let's try this. Let's see if it works. Cool. I think it will. I think it'll help humanity to move in a better direction. But if I'm too attached to it, then it drives me nuts, and I don't want to be driven nuts. So yes, frustration levels increase at the beginning, seems, because you see more clearly how the sausage is made. But then it seems to reduce over time, at least for me.
Yeah, it does make sense, because there's a humility in your answer as well. It's recognizing that, you know, we are all humans and we are flawed. So putting the same expectation on everybody in the world doesn't make any sense, right? Because exactly what you said, humans are different, and humans have their own ways of operating, let's say their own frameworks.
Yeah.
But the reason why I asked that question is because what I try to practice, what I try to do in my daily life with everybody that I interact with, is I try to be really there for them and really listen to them, right? And when somebody gives me good news, right, something beautiful happened. They got a kid, they got a new car, you know, they got a new house. You know, my reaction shouldn't be, Oh, you got a new house. Oh, nice, man. We are also looking for a new house, right? That's robbing them of their story. That's robbing them of their light, right? Don't do that. It just makes you look like a dick, right? Ask about it, right? Give it some attention. Stand still with them, give them, say, that's nice, man. Good for you. Awesome. I'm happy for that, right? So, and people enjoy that. That's a beautiful way to interact with people. And I truly believe that the moment, I truly to my core believe this, that if that is your standard modus apparatus, that you will build way better relationships with people. You will have way more interesting conversations with people. Not doing that provides the opposite, right? People will feel that they're not being listened to, right? They will not take the time anymore to tell you a beautiful thing because they know you're not going to listen. They know you're not going to give them any attention, right? So it's it's like it's back to the beginning of what we talked about, right? It's that kid that wants to do something and maybe did something beautiful, goes to his or her mother or father, lays that out, and the parent doesn't give it any attention, right? Why would that kid do that again with their parent? They know the parent is not listening to them anyway, right? This is the exact same thing. So the reason why I asked you the question, and once again, it sounds like an abstract question, but it absolutely is not, is that to me, and this is my personal experience, as someone who practices that, and it sounds very much like you are that kind of person as well, it sometimes is very, very frustrating to see that is not being returned. That is not being done. Let me give you a super quick example, and then I'll wrap up with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right now, our old car is dying, right? So we need a new car. This car is very old. We've driven it for a long, long time. Very cheap car, so very nice. Made us save a lot of money. But it's time to get rid of it, right? It's time for the next chapter. So now we found a new car. We're super excited about it. And yesterday we talked about this with someone close to us, right? Hey, new car, can do this, can do that, whatever. We're coming. Exciting. First reaction. It's a car it's an electric car, right? Those batteries, I don't trust them that much.
Mm.
Dude, really? That's it? That's the reaction, right? What are you doing, right? That's what I mean. That is frustrating. So back to you.
Yeah.
If
Congratulations on the car, by the way.
thanks.
Yeah.
But it really sounds like the more mindful you are, the more frustrating humanity becomes for exactly this reason. But I like your answer. I really like it, because what you're saying is, don't get stuck in that feeling. Just take a step back and just love this human aspect, right? Love this little thing about what makes us human. And humans are flawed, and humans will be humans. In this case, 95% of the cases.
And you think about it, think about any one person at any moment of time, all the different social, political, geographic, cultural, family of origin forces that came together to mold them into the person that they are that very moment. I mean, it's the complexity of the human system is amazing. The forces that help generate it and form it and mold it are innumerable. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing we were able to do what we do, even though maybe from our perspective, you're like, why are we doing it? But like, wow, we survived this long. It's pretty cool, But I see it with my couples, and the appreciation piece is what I heard. Is what I heard you say. It's like I share some good news, and that person's like, oh, they show appreciation for your happiness, or something along those lines. Like, hey, I'm really happy this happened for you, and good news, and let's celebrate. I find with my couples, like when they first started with each other, they had a lot of that, and then it started dying out. They take each other for granted. And if you just bring that back into the couple a little bit, just the gratefulness and the appreciation for the small things that your partner does for you on a daily basis. They make you coffee or make you breakfast, or, give you a kiss or write you a little note or take care of the kid on a certain thing for a certain thing. Things you're like, they should be doing that anyways. Like yes, maybe if that's your agreement that they should be doing those things anyways, if that's a conscious agreement you guys came to, doesn't mean you can't show appreciation for your partner doing those things for you or for the family. Like that goes far as opposed to nitpicking. You didn't do the right, you didn't do right, you didn't do right, you're doing it wrong, or you're beating the person up. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be critical in a constructive way to help them see things, to do things differently that might be better, but it's also your tone and your volume. But just being appreciative and grateful and happy for any the nice things that they do for you and the family or successes they have in their life. Like if your partner gets a raise, but it wasn't as much as it could have been, like, okay, why don't you celebrate the fact that they got a raise or they got a new car and they're really happy? Doesn't mean you can't be constructively critical after the fact. So maybe some lessons they can learn there to do things a little bit differently next time to have even a better outcome. Cool. But like to your point, like beating them up the first thing or pointing out the insufficiencies, I don't think goes very far in making the other person feel good about sharing something with you.
In that situation, should we make a big deal out of it? Right? Should we tell the person that we're interacting with, hey, dude, not cool? Right? Or should we let it slide? What do you think is the right answer there?
Yeah. So with my couples work, and I think this is about all major relationships, maybe not with your mailman or your garbage man or whatever, but like, major relationships. You want to have conscious agreements, like how you want to relate to this other human being, and you consciously decide and have that conversation. So I don't think it's fair to be critical of someone who doesn't know how you would like them to show up in the relationship with you.
Yeah.
Like you can't have high expectations. They don't know what they are. They don't meet them because they don't know what they are. And then you yell at them for not meeting them. Right. But if you had a conversation with your friend, like, my preference in this relationship is when I share some good news for you with you is that you show some happiness for it. That'd be really meaningful to me. And the person says, oh, okay, I agree to that. And then maybe the secondary thing is like, and if you see some holes in my thinking or in my behaviors, I'd love your feedback, but secondary to acknowledging and being grateful for whatever the success I just had in my life. But, that's a conversation you two can have agreements around it. And that's the standard you're now creating for the relationship. And then you both can live up to those standards. But if that person doesn't know, they can't mind read. That's not really fair.
While you were talking, I realized that there was an assumption hidden in that example that I gave you. And that assumption is indeed, you know what I expect of you, which is not true, right? So that person that I just talked about has no idea that they did something wrong. That's very, very true. So it doesn't have to be malicious or ill-intended or whatever, right? It might from their point of view, it might have been very well intended. Like, hey, watch out, those batteries. I heard these things about it. Watch out for that, right? Maybe that's very friendly advice, unasked for, whatever. But it's very well intended. So having that conversation, opening it up, and just not being confrontational about it, obviously, but
yeah, it doesn't have to be a fight. But I tell my couples, I believe people have psychic powers, but let's just assume from the moment that you're not a mind reader. You can't have expectations that your partner can be a mind reader. You have to clearly lay it out. These are our agreements on how we want to do these things in our lives together. We both agree to it. Cool. Now we have standards. And we can, if we don't meet them, we can have a conversation about them. But if the other person doesn't know what you expect of them, how can they live up to them? So to your point, yeah. And it increases the intimacy if you can have that conversation with your wife or your husband or your dear friend, family member. Like, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's make explicit how we want to relate to one another on this particular topic. Let's make some agreements on it and let's stick to them as best as we can. We're humans. We're fallible. We're not always going to do the best job. But that's a deep level of intimacy to actually have that kind of conversation with someone you care about. Yeah, instead of like being kind of pissed at them and frustrated with them and being resentful, and they have no fucking idea what's going on. Like, because it's all in your own head.
Yeah, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
Including yourself. Wow, Michael, I'm not sure if, and I made this explicit a couple of times, but you've made a couple of things click for me during this conversation. So I'm very, very happy with that and very thankful for that. And this, with that said, it also feels like the perfect moment to also to wrap the conversation up. I think this is the most logical moment to do that. But we talked about your personal journey just a little bit. I feel like we've mostly also because of the question that were asked, but we've wandered off from that very quickly. But I do feel that the information that you've given and the knowledge that you've shared about, what people can do to become more mindful and what people can do to approach their own body and to get it back into connection with themselves before they go into let's say pure therapy sessions. I think that's very good information to have. So yeah, first of all, thank you very much for sharing those experiences and talking about these different topics and laying out what you're seeing and also making it very practical. I think that's very helpful, especially to someone like myself who has never, thought about it's not true, but who has never given it a serious chance, for example, to even understand what meditation is, and how to do it, how to engage in it, and what it provides. So these are all just a couple of loose hanging things, but yeah, it made quite a bit click. So again, thank you very much for that. It was a really lovely conversation.
Yeah, if there's anything I can do to continue the conversation and be helpful to you, reach out to me offline and we can talk. I'm more than happy to be helpful.
Yeah, to be quite honest, this is one of those conversations again that I prepared, like I do in every single conversation. I prepare a bunch of questions just to make sure that if the conversation falls flat, there's something to fall back on, and just to keep performance structure in it as well. And generally, what I find is that the more questions I don't use, so that stay unchecked, the more organic this conversation is. And with this conversation, it's the exact same way. Like most of the questions have not been asked. Like questions like active listening and about resilience. I know that those are very big things also within your practice. We haven't delved into that, and that's fine. That's maybe ground for the next time. But that just speaks to the organic way that a beautiful conversation should go, I think. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate you having me on.